Shalom Aleichem, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Shmoozing with Avi. Today, I am very proud and excited to have a guest that has such an extraordinary history of work, a body of work, and an amazing relationship with his mother, just like me. Dr. Jud Newborn is the founding historian and co-creator of New York's Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust, which is an extraordinary accomplishment if that was the only thing he had done. But he has a PhD with distinction from the University of Chicago. He is an expert on anti-Semitism, extremism, and the fight for human rights worldwide. And I suspect that living in the age of war in Europe again, and the denazification of Ukraine by the insane madman who is now running that, we will probably have a lot to talk about in respect to learning from history. Dr. Newborn is co-author of the critically acclaimed classic, Sophie, Shull, and the White Rose, which is a compelling account of the unique anti-Nazi student resistance group that was led by Hans and Sophie Shull, who were former Hitler Youth leaders, and they have become icons of civil courage in Germany today. At the height of the Balkans crisis in July 1995, Dr. Newborn gave the first lecture on the Holocaust ever held at the United Nations, and he called out against the UN's abandonment of the Bosnian Muslims to mass murder. And once again, I think we will have plenty to talk about relevance for today's world. He's also the creator of, or co-creator of, Ingrid Pitt, Beyond the Forest, the award-winning animated short film about the triumphant child Holocaust survivor. This is a true story that reminds us of the need to protect those most vulnerable, whatever their backgrounds, wherever they live. As a poet and a lyricist, he's collaborated with country, pop, and classical composers, including the Pulitzer Prize winner Shulamit Ran. And today he serves as special programs curator for Long Island's renowned Cinema Arts Center, which I so look forward to talking about. The Anne Frank Center honored his passion and lifelong activism with the 2018 Spirit of Anne Frank Human Rights Award, and he's currently working on the first major Hollywood motion picture about the White Rose. So, ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't be more honored to have someone I've been meaning to get to know for many, many years, Dr. Jud Newborn. Please join me, Jud.
Hello, Avi. And I couldn't be more honored. Shalom. I couldn't be more honored than to be interviewed by the great Avi Hoffman.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. That and $6 will get me a Starbucks.
Yeah.
But I appreciate the compliment.
Well, and the theatrical connection matters a lot to me because my family, many of them were in showbiz and are in showbiz. So I can be Mr. Academic Scholar, and I can also be Mr. Showbiz, and that's what I do when I lecture. So,
well, you know what? Let's start with Mr. Showbiz, and then we'll get to the more serious side. I really, I happen to know a little bit about it because you and I talked about it just before, and I've looked it up, and you've sent me some information, but I actually remember your mother, Rita. Many, many years ago, I was on the Hebrew Actors Union Board of Directors, and she was on EVD. Can you tell us about your upbringing, your history, how you got involved in this field, the work your mom did? And more than that, I always love to know about the roots. Was your mother born in the United States, or was she born in Europe?
And my mom, Rita Cohen, even that's a story. My mom was born the first generation American Jew, the daughter of Eastern European immigrants. This is very important now, pertinent, the Ukraine. Where else? So many of us came from the Ukraine.
My father.
Your father?
My father, Shtetl, at the time, he thought it was Hungary. Then it was Czechoslovakia, but now it's in the Ukraine.
And my grandmother Shtetl was is Kremenets, and it's in Volhynia. It's it's sort of, it's right now it's in Western Ukraine. So where the people in Lviv are feeling right now that they're safe, but maybe not for long. Well, Kremenets is not far from there, so who knows what will happen. And of course,
we will definitely talk a lot about Ukraine later.
yeah.
But I want to know about your grandparents who came here. I want to know whether there was Yiddish in the house and your mom, obviously, and then how you got, involved.
Yeah, well, my grandmother, my mother, this is my mother's side. So my grandmother's mother, my grandma Ethel, who of course my grandfather called Ethel, not Ethel. She was the last one of 8 children to emigrate in 1921 from Kremenets in the Ukraine. All the others, went slowly, but boy, those families, the women just had baby after baby. So in 1921, she went with her mother. They were the last to come over to the United States at a time when there was famine and there was anti-Jewish actions in the Ukraine around there and so forth. My grandmother had so many stories to tell, and they were not just Bubamaises. They were like, very, I got to tell you one because it involves an actor. My grandmother told me that she was educated believe it or not, in a nunnery, teaching, learning Russian literature and chemistry. And her father was a miller. So he ground the flour for the nunnery, and that was a little exchange they made. So she had a good education, actually. And she was working for her first job in an apothecary shop with the apotheca. And suddenly, a man came in, a young, desperate man with a gun. And the apothecary pushed my grandmother to one side, and he dashed to the other side, and the guy shot. And he shot in the long mirror that was behind the counter and right where my grandmother's head had been. And then he grabbed a jar of cocaine that was on the counter, because it was legal apparently then, and he grabbed it and he left. And my grandmother said, with hissing through her teeth, "That's an actor," because actors were apparently thought to be bohemian and maybe drug addicts.
And drug addicts.
Yes, sure, look at how many times have I been arrested? Anyway, so that's my grandmother with many other stories. And of course, she told them to me and she told them to my mother.
So she came at around the early 1900s in the second wave, or the first wave in the 1880s?
The last wave following after the Russian Revolution, when there was there was civil war going on in Ukraine. And
Anatevka, the pogrom.
Yes. Right.
Anatevka, right. They were running away.
Others left before World War I. So, and we left behind, they left behind older brother, older sister, all of their family. I have photographs that show the different generations with little kids in the bottom rung, and all murdered in the Holocaust. So my mom, I could go on forever. My mom grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and her name was Rebecca Cohen. And she was in a 90% Italian neighborhood, and the other ones were Norwegian. And strangely, the principal of the school was Jewish, at the elementary school. And he came personally to my grandparents' house and he said, "What are you doing to this girl? It's bad enough that her name is Cohen. Does it have to be Rebecca too? Can't you make it a little bit more like the other Italian girls?" So they changed my mother's name to Rita. And so she became Rita Cohen. And so that's a little bit of that early history. My grandparents were very creative. They were socialists. They read the newspapers every day. My grandfather actually had a cantorial voice, and supposedly he came from a generation of cantors, but that's drifting into a past that I can't have access to anymore.
I assume they spoke Yiddish in the house?
They spoke Yiddish, and when they didn't want my mother to understand them, they spoke Russian, or they spoke Russian and Polish. I don't know about any other languages, but my mother picked up Yiddish pretty well enough, obviously, to sing later in her own program on WEVD in 1947. Mom was was in the Borscht Belt. I forget the name of the hotel. I have it somewhere. In 1940, must have been, I don't know if it was the summer of 47 or the summer of 46, but in any event, she was the singer and also the straight man to Henny Youngman. And Henny Youngman called her when it was time for her to come out. He said, she's the girl Shan-Tootsie. So instead of Shan-Tootsie. And she was quite a Tootsie. So she'd be the straight man, and then she'd sing one of her, in a beautiful, high, clear bell-like soprano, a Yiddish song, a popular song. This is the Borscht Belt, so she wasn't singing art songs. It was more popular material. And then Mitchell Levitsky, who was one of the famous announcers on WEVD, discovered her and said to her, would you like to have your own program? So she wound up in 1947 having for a year her own program called Rita Sorel Sings. And since we're Jewish, Sorel, nice French sounding, great stage name, right? For an opera singer, Rita Sorel. Well, it's from Sorelea, Sorelea Sorel. That was a joke between her and her Zadie. So that's where I first, later, years later, she saved recordings. She would make recordings. WEVD was not, archiving itself. So my mom would want to have a record of what she had done. So she would call up another a recording studio someplace. And she'd say, turn on the radio. I'm going to sing from 12 to 12:15. And so please record it for me. So that's why I have a couple of 78s of my mom singing with a little scratchy stuff, and Mitchell Levitsky saying, you go to afterwards, you can go to the Paramount and see such and such in Yiddish. It's a little commercial. And I also have other recordings she did, some very good quality, singing. She had a theme song, which was Abe Elstein's Ich will ewig dich gedenken. And she'd sing a little bit of that. And then she would sing, one recording after that, she sang Shalom Sekunda's Gedenk, ich hab mein Herz gegeben dir. So that was a pretty lovely song. But then she would sing an Italian song or a popular song. She'd sing Gershwin's Summertime, or she'd sing, maybe she'd sing an aria for the people who liked Italian aria, and crossover stuff.
Did she do Yiddish theater?
She didn't do Yiddish theater. This was the era of like Catherine Grayson and Jane Powell and these young sopranos. Then there was an era in Hollywood where they actually liked good classical sounding voices, which is kind of gone a long time ago, I think. So she was sort of hoping she'd get into film that way. But she was also being trained vocally, seriously, by German Jewish refugees exclusively. She was trained by Madame Ruth Kish, who was a German leader, singer, beloved, who wound up only being allowed to sing in some of the Jewish organizations under the Nazis, and then she managed to get out of Germany. So she was my mother's vocal coach, and there's a good story there. In a recording of Schubert my mom on WNYC, the young people's concerts was showcasing the students of Madame Kish. And she was a real Yeki. She was a German Jew. And my mother was from, Yiddish background. So my mother was singing Heiden Röslein, which is a Schubert lead. And it's supposed to be Röslein, 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 schön, schön. She said Schein. In between Shane and Shine, but it wasn't Shern. And afterwards, Madame Kish was so furious with her. And she said, Rita, this is not Jewish, this is German. So, yucky. That's the story. And I forgot so theater. It was only later when my mom retired from being a housewife and a political wife. My father was in politics. She retired, and at age 60, she went back into showbiz. And in this case, she started getting into film and theater. So she did various things, and she had small things. Woody Allen actually used to ask for her for his mise en scène and to be, an extra. But she's at the very beginning of Crimes and Misdemeanors when the camera pans across Claire Bloom, my mom, and who was the guy who was the star in it? There's so many stories.
Well, but here's a crazy coincidence. Guess who else was an extra on Crimes and Misdemeanors?
Who?
Me.
You? What did you do? Where were
I
you?
was
In
in
what
the
scene?
bar scene. I stood behind the bar. That was pretty much it. I was the
Yeah.
bartender.
Well, gee, that's great. I hope you did you have to learn how to make drinks?
No, but I had to learn not to look at Woody Allen, and because
Oh,
we weren't allowed to communicate with him in any way. We were given very strict instructions.
no. Well, my mom had a good well, Woody Allen did something nice for my mom. Besides liking her look, so she would ask her to be in different scenes, in different movies. Claire Bloom. Now, Claire Bloom, she's very lovely. She was very lovely, and I respected her, except everyone, she would kept on trying to shove my mother out of the scene. And they all had their marks to stand on, and she almost knocked my 16-year-old mother on her, tushy. So finally, Woody Allen, who noticed all of this nonsense going on, sent his stage director, whoever it was, down and said, "Claire, stop shoving Rita out of the way. You stay on your mark and let Rita stay on her mark." So my mother, of course, told me that. And I always used to think if I ever meet Claire Bloom, I'm going to kick her in her butt. But
Funny.
so
Yeah, I remember your mom. I don't remember her well, but like I said, in the early '80s, when I got back to New York, I got involved in the Yiddish theater and the Hebrew Actors Union, and I just remember the name. I remember being around. She probably came to see shows that I did, and so tell us about your dad. Where did they meet? Where did he come from?
oh, my dad, his parents were from Hushiaten, which is now just over the border in Ukraine, but it used to be in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's how far back we go. And they had in Hushiaten one of the great Renaissance-style fortress synagogues, which is now crumbling. And there were a lot of Hasidic Jews there. But my grandfather, who was born in 1887, that makes me feel old. But I felt old when I knew he was born then 50 years ago. Anyway, so they came to the United States in 1906 with his father, Solomon Shlomo Rabinowitz, and his son, Jacob Newborn. The Rabinowitz bit is crazy. I lost my entire patrilineal line. It turned into my matrilineal line because Shlomo Rabinowitz somehow had to get over the border from the Russian Empire and wanted to disguise himself. So he took his wife's name, Neugebauern. So now I don't know who my Rabinowitz relatives are. I'd like to find them. Anyway, they came in 1906. Promptly on Yom Kippur, my great-grandfather, Shlomo, who my father was named after, fell faint. And they put him next door in a tailor shop, gave him a clear liquid that they found on the counter to drink. It was cleaner fluid, and they killed him. So that was that. Oh, my poor grandfather was like 19, and he's the one, Jacob Neugebauern, who became Newborn, who had to bring all of the other family members over year after year, making some more money, bringing them over until they were all here.
Wow, what a story. That's like a movie, Judd.
Yeah, we have a lot of stories.
Amazing. So you guys are basically born again.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I call myself? I didn't think of this when I was doing my Holocaust work, but it occurred to me later that my name is Judd Newborn, which is Judd in German is Jud, which is the nasty form of Jew. Jude, der Jude is a Jew. Der Jud Marx Mordecai. That's what they call Karl Marx. And my last name was Neugebauern, so I'm der Neugeborene Jud, the newborn Jew.
Right.
And in Yiddish, it's Yida Neugebauern.
Wow.
So when my mother sang Roschenkes mit Mandlin to me as a little boy, the quintessential Yiddish lullaby, right, that every Eastern European mother would sing to their children. And yet now the new generation's never heard of it. It's dying out.
I used to sing it to my children because my grandmother sang it to my mother sang it to me, and I sang it to my kids.
Thank God. I would like it to keep, stay alive. My mother made a.
And it's being sung. If you go on
Oh,
YouTube
really?
and put in Rozinkis mit Mandlin, it's being sung by entirely new generations now.
That heartens me because
Good.
I don't want these traditions to be lost, and that's what you're doing, keeping these things alive
Right.
and passing them on. So, and anyway, if you recall in the lyrics, she sings. She's rocking her little boy, and she says "Schluf, Yidele, Schluf," and I said, "Who's Yidele?" And she said, "That's you." And I said, "What do you mean that's me?" She said, "Yeah, you're Yidele." And I said, "You mean they wrote that song for me?" I was totally, it was cute, but it was lovely. Yeah. So I'm the North, but in Germany, when I went to do my field work as an anthropologist for the University of Chicago on the Holocaust, my name was quite a shock to a lot of the Germans. Like when I went to the registrar, I had to sign up at the University of Munich as a doctoral candidate. And the woman looked at my name and she said, "Jud Newborn, das ist nicht möglich. Ist das ein Witz? That's not possible. Is that some kind of joke? Because it's Jud Newborn."
Jud Newborn.
I said to her, "It's not pronounced Jud, it's pronounced Chud, Chud. You have to, they don't have that ch sound."
Right.
I said, "It's Chud." Got it? Chud. Anyway.
Well, so yeah, Rozinkis mit Mandlin, interestingly enough, since we're talking about it, I've sung it many times myself. You're right. She was right. It was about you, not just because she wanted you to feel good, but the whole concept of the song is the Pintale Yid, Shlofje Yidale, Ir ben Yochidel Yidale. And it's the mother of Zion, the daughter of Zion, singing the lullaby to her little baby boy, Yidale, the little Jew.
Yeah.
The little Jew.
Yeah, it's an iconic bit of our culture.
The greatest. It's one of the greatest numbers ever written in the Yiddish milieu.
Yeah.
So did you speak Yiddish growing up? Not really.
No. My father grew up with Yiddish as his first language, and the teacher, of course, said to him, this is ages ago, said, "None of that here."
Right.
So he started speaking English. Not everybody got that. And my mother, I grew up listening to my parents every now and then speaking Yiddish, and you know what they did when they didn't want us to understand. It's the famous story. They would speak Yiddish, but I got enough of it. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to take German in 6th grade so that I could understand the Yiddish. And also I wanted to understand the art songs because my mother was a very serious leader singer of German art song and Italian opera. And I used to listen to the leader, and she sang me German lieder all the time too. So in a way, German is almost as much a Muttersprache for me, a mother's tongue, Mama Loschen, as Yiddish. So I had a close affinity to German culture, and the affinity to German culture with simultaneously the knowledge of my family who were murdered, and then we have the photographs and I know the stories, that came together somehow and made me, I had a love of German culture, but I didn't obviously love what had happened. I didn't love Nazism, it's, of course, but I wanted to understand desperately, why did this happen? In fact, we were watching TV, it was on Long Island, and I was a kid, and they were showing propaganda films that the Nazis made of children in the Warsaw Ghetto. I remember this particular image, which you may remember from some of these films. It's a little boy looking like a little half-starved monkey on a string, tap dancing for pennies and smiling.
Yeah,
we've probably all seen it.
Yeah.
And I was so furious, and I wasn't furious. My older brother, who's a Hollywood film composer, by the way, you might want to talk to him sometime. All of the great classic comedies of the 80s and 90s, that's my brother, Jud Newborn.
Yeah.
But he was very furious. He was older than me. So I was like aching with lack of comprehension. How could this happen? How could anyone do this? And when I was like about 4 years old, I was actually in my grandmother's apartment in Brooklyn, and I started, kids were looking for treasures in their grandmother's house. I was digging through her bureau drawer, and under a stack of blankets, like it was hidden away, was this sepia family portrait on, hard, cardboard of 3 generations. And I ran to her with this great discovery, smiling, said, "Grandma, look what I found. Who are they? Who are they?" And my grandmother, who was the essence of jollity, always smiling, and she smelled sweet from the sweat of baking rogalach, all this stuff. No, but it was my grandma. Her eyes, her face turned red. She looked away from the picture and she says, don't ask me. Hitler burnt them all. And I suddenly thought, oh my, I was only 4 or 5 years old. I didn't know burned people. I mean, burned people my grandmother loved. What is that? And it stayed with me as a little hole that was smoldering. And then when I saw that image on TV, I went out and I was like pounding pillows. And I said, I just had to know. And from that day forth, I wanted to try and explain the secret of the Holocaust. Why did it happen the way it did? Why that industrial mass murder of our people? And a seemingly rational, systematic enterprise, not craziness.
You preempted my next question, because I was going to say, if your family came, around the turn of the century, then your specific family was not involved in the Holocaust. Your actual, blood relatives at home.
Nuclear family.
And yet, here you are telling the story of how at age 4, you kind of suddenly came into contact with something crazy. When did you realize in your life? I'm assuming you went to public school and you went to, probably Hebrew school, or, and you had your bar mitzvah. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. But most importantly, when did you suddenly realize that the Holocaust was something you needed to do as a vocation, as a professional need to express?
Yeah, thoughtful questions to answer. This goes back again to my mom, because the stories help shape us, don't they? Family stories. My mom, because they were poor, parents had a little grocery store. My mom had double jobs while taking her voice lessons, and she was on the teletype machine for, I think it was either Western Union or probably the PM newspaper, which was New York's afternoon newspaper. She was on the lobster shift, the evening shift, and she would be singing sotto voce to the other older women on the shift, usually entertaining them with a German song, a lead or something from Mozart. And all of a sudden, she told me the ticket, the tape, that has all of the information, it's this tape that carries the teletype information, said Allies enter, Ohrdruf concentration camp, Jews stacked like cordwood. And she said, oh, that must be what happened to Mama's family, and threw up. So that's one of my stories. So it was already there all this time. And when I was at working later at Oxford University Press, that was my first job. I don't know how old I was. I was 20, whatever. I had been at Cambridge University, actually. And I was a serious poet. And I was also going to study anthropology there after undergraduate work at NYU.
Is there any other kind of poet?
Huh?
Is there any other kind of poet?
Then what kind of poet? I don't remember.
Other than a serious poet?
Oh. Well, some poets take themselves a little too seriously. But anyway, I came back to New York, and I was working at Oxford University Press, and a book came out that I was working in the trade advertising and promotion department. So I was helping promote the books. And this was a book by Terence Dupre called The Survivor. And it was a deeply moving book about how was it that people could survive in concentration camps longer than a normal functioning organism would have long capitulated to the starvation and the disease and the humiliation. But survivors, being human beings, had something in them that could keep them going longer than was even humanly possible, those who did survive. So I was fascinated by and moved by this idea. And I remember writing to Dupre, Terence, and saying, gee, I want to do something with this too in my own way when I start doing whatever I'm going to do. And I actually had been accepted both simultaneously to Cambridge University and the University of Chicago for graduate work, for doctoral work. And so I left my University of Chicago acceptance until I fallow for 2 years, while I wrote my poetry and I worked at Oxford University Press. And then I reactivated it and they took me. And the question then was, what are you going to do for your anthropological fieldwork? Am I going to go to Samoa? Am I going to go live with some tribe in the Amazon? Well, I thought, you know what? One of the big anthropologists try to explain mysteries, right? They try to explain other cultures which we cannot understand. They're opaque to us, their meanings, their rituals. We have to get involved with them and do participant observation. That's the term. And I thought, well, nobody has been able to explain the Holocaust. Now, that may be close to us in terms of culture, but my tribe is going to be the Nazis, and I'm going to go and I'm going to find out what was going on in those dark minds. And I want to tell you, I interviewed some SS men in prison. You wouldn't have wanted to enter their minds without a flashlight for fear you wouldn't get out. So I decided that that was going to be my thing. And it was the most important thing in my life. And I was not that eager to get a PhD and become an academic. I wanted to be a writer. I was always thought of myself as a writer, but I wanted to use the structure of the dissertation and doctoral process to do something important on the Holocaust. And that would be my big book. And it's still waiting for me to revise it. But in any event, so I went to Germany and I lived for 3 years from 1980 to 1983, based in Munich. I want to tell you, it was it was a period of sharp cultural critical awareness because of the subject matter. I mean, when I first got to Germany in 1980, there had been a bombing at the Oktoberfest by neo-Nazis, actually. And I was going in the subway down. I lived in the Olympia Center, which was where the Israeli athletes had been killed. And everything comes together somehow. Anyway, I was riding in the subway down to the center of city where there was a protest against the neo-Nazi bombing. And the women in front of me in the subway car were wearing these expensive Loden green Bavarian coats, and they looked very smug, and they were laughing and talking to one another. And I said silently to myself, I thought, where were you when the Jews were hauled off? In which direction were your arms outstretched, like that or like that or like that? Guess what? When we got out of the subway, the U-Bahn, we were all walking together to the same protest. And I spoke to them, and it turned out that they had been members of the Anti-Faschisten, the anti-fascist Bund, and they had been imprisoned in Ravensbrück concentration camp for women for being anti-Nazis. So that knocked a chip off my shoulder, and I decided I'm going to approach all of this I'm going to let the emotions be in the background, but I'm going to approach this as objectively as possible, but I'm going to try to find out what made mass murder and the Holocaust happened the way it did. And so I studied Nazi film because the films were fascinatingly revealing. I studied the way in which they constructed industrial landscapes because they did industrial mass murder in Auschwitz, right? So I had to set the mass murder within the broader context of the Nazi project to create their folk community that's going to last racially for 1,000 years, the million-year Reich. So it was like a pointillist painting by Seurat. If you look very closely, you just see dots of color, right? Indiscrete dot. And so let's say the death camps, for sake of argument, were little red dots of, let's say bloody. And then you move back and forth. And as you move back and forth, you start to see the gestalt, the forms emerge, like in Sunday in the Park with George. And that was really kind of what I was doing in a cultural way. I was looking close and trying to see, where does this mass murder part fit into the broader Nazi project of creating the Millennial Reich? And that's the way I approached it.
I'm curious to ask you more about it, but I'm assuming that if you were in Munich, then you were probably doing much of your work in Dachau initially, because that was the first camp, 1932 or 33,
33.
And served as the model.
Yeah, Dachau. This is also very interesting, actually. Everyone knows that the sign over the gateway to Auschwitz was Arbeit macht frei, right? Work makes free, work liberates. Well, the sign over the gate, in the gate to Dachau, the first concentration camp, says Arbeit macht frei, because that was the motto it wasn't just designed to, this is part of my dissertation, Revelations. It wasn't just designed to be cynical and sort of, make people think that they were going to be liberated when in fact the Germans were just rubbing their hands waiting to murder them. It was actually part of the German ideology of, work, and that work was something positive and it could organize and make you orderly, whereas Jews were intrinsically parasitical, living off the natural labor of Germans, right? They were like into money, sucking they would say they were sucking the blood out of our marrow. So that Arbeit macht frei is a serious thing for understanding what the camps are about. In any event, so yeah, I was at Dachau, and that's where I saw the sign for the first time.
Right. I don't remember if it's at Dachau or at Auschwitz where the workers who built the gate turned the B upside down in order for people to understand that there's something not quite right here.
I'm amazed that you know that. I wonder how you know that. At the time that I wrote the dissertation, I ended with the picture of the sign at Dachau, and I mentioned the B turned upside down. And I say, was this some indirect way that these otherwise totally dominated workers were turning the B upside down on the Nazis to assert themselves?
Yeah.
But how do you know that? That's like a rare thing to know.
There is a very large-scale project that I'm still involved in. I have been for several years. It's called the Dachau Album Project. And if you go to dachaualbum.org, you will see what it's all about. It's a very important Holocaust artifact, which actually got us an invitation from Pope Francis to come to meet him at the Vatican and show him the album.
Wow.
It's an interfaith artifact. It's a fascinating project. So I've actually been to Dachau several times. There's a documentary film, and there's an enormous amount of research that I've done about Dachau. But this is not about me. This is about you. So you have now, at this point in your life, how old are you here? In your 20s, I'm guessing?
When I'm in Germany doing my research?
Yeah.
I went in 1980, so I would have been at that point 27.
Okay.
Right.
Right. So you have now figured out that there is this important element of your tribe which you had this need to understand.
Yes.
I'm fascinated by this personally because, as I told you earlier, my father was actually a survivor of Auschwitz, and my mom survived, from Siberia in the slave labor camps, and they both came to America after the war. So this, for me, is a genetically personal, thing. It's in my DNA, so I understand why I'm interested.
Right.
But I'm fascinated by people like you who find that kind of interest. May I ask whether you came to a conclusion about the reason for the Holocaust? Why did the German... Only because here we are in 2022, and we are 13 days into what seems to me like a replay, only from the other direction, of what happened, in the 1920s and into the 30s and 40s, which we understand and know what happened. How does that happen? How do a people go from being the most civilized tribe? The Germans, of course, were the most civilized culture pretty much on the planet, to becoming that?
That's the $64 billion question, given inflation, instead of 64,000. I could put it in a nutshell, my particular analysis, my findings, but I prefer not to, because I still got to get this thing published.
Okay.
And believe it or not, there are certain fields that are hotly contested, and for historians especially, and I'm a historical anthropologist, it's still one of the hottest things is to write about and explain Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And I got to get this thing out before I say too much. But the way you phrased it, how in the land of Kant and Goethe, they always say. I'll give you something that will segue to something else that's important to me. How in the land of Kant and Goethe. This is my book, Sophie, Shull, and the White Rose. And this is the 75th anniversary edition. I'm not 75 years old. This is, I didn't write it then. Pardon me. It's 75 years in 2018 that Sophie and Hans Scholl, the leaders of the White Rose German student anti-Nazi resistance, were captured and executed. And the segue is that these, which will get us to Goethe, these German kids were former Hitler Youth leaders. And Hans and Sophie transformed uniquely to become the greatest heroes of the German anti-Nazi resistance. It was an extraordinary thing because they were Hitler Youth leaders first, and they were charismatic, so they rose to the top. And then they transformed, and the secret to why they transformed has not been known for decades, 7 decades. It was suppressed. Turns out, as I discovered through my own original research, Hans Scholl, the brother, had been arrested for a teen gay relationship. And of course, homosexuality was
right, sure.
criminal. So that was what started him on the route to becoming an anti-Nazi. And there's more to it, and that'll be part of my film that I'm working on based on the book. But why do I say Goethe now and Kant? Well, in 2003, in a nationwide month-long TV competition in Germany to choose the top 10 most important Germans of all time, people under the age of 40 catapulted Hans and Sophie Scholl of the White Rose into 4th place, beating out Bach, Goethe, Gutenberg, Bismarck, Willy Brandt, and Albert Einstein.
Wow.
And the votes, if the votes of those under 40 in 2003 had been counted alone, they would have been number 1, the most important Germans of all time. Well, who is at the helm of German society today? People who were under 40 then. So if they did this thing again, this competition, I'm sure the Hans and Sophie would be number 1. And why? Why wouldn't it be Bach? Well, Bach is wonderful, but he did not risk his life to save people. In Germany, where they've taken very seriously the issue of their ugly past from Nazi Germany and have been very responsible about it, this is an important part of German culture and self-identity today, that we take a proper stand on Nazi Germany, we condemn it, and we protest this kind of thing. So for Germans, the heroes who stood up and risked themselves to save others and to tell the truth, to speak truth to power, which has become such a popular phrase in the last 5 years since a certain man was elected president. That's what matters for Germans. That's more important than if you write a great symphony. So this story needs to be told widely to the world, and I want it to be told in an American feature film.
Well, I was going to say the government of Germany should fund your film. I don't think there's a question, and if there's anything I can do to help you. So you co-authored
Yes.
which version of the book? You're saying it's the 75th anniversary of them, but not the book.
Not the book.
So tell us about the writing of the book.
Well, the book has gone through a number of editions. And initially, I wrote it with a woman I had met in Germany of an older generation, and we started on it. And it started out, actually, there was a movie in Germany years and years ago about the White Rose, a German film that gave basically the action. And it was made a big impact in Germany. I remember sitting in German theaters in 1982. And as it came to the point where they always focus on Sophie, by the way. Sophie the girl is very appealing, like an Anne Frank, you know, and she certainly suffered a fate that was the loss of life, you know, for what she did. And actually, some of the things that Sophie wrote in her diaries echo things that Anne Frank wrote in her diary. So here a German and Jewish girl who actually had a spiritual connection, despite the fact that the Nazis would have wanted to drive them as far apart as possible. In any event, when the film was coming to an end, they picked Sophie, the actress, up and put her on a guillotine because they were all beheaded. And at that point, everybody in the theater, especially young people, grabbed each other's arms on the seats of the, and I did too. It was like, oh my God. And then it said at the end of the film, judges who were part of the trials who condemned the White Rose kids to death were still working in Germany as jurists in the 1960s. And the fact that they were convicted of treason has still not been taken off the record. So that started people thinking about the subject more.
I was going to say, there are some people who may be watching this who don't know the story, and you've given a couple of, little tidbits, but maybe you could summarize it in a couple of sentences.
Sure. In a couple of sentences, a brother and a sister, Hans and his younger sister, Sophie, in 1933, raised by Christian humanist parents, social democrats, were still seduced by the Nazis at age 12 and 15, and they joined against their parents' wishes, and they became not only members of the Hitler Youth, but because they were charismatic, which we see later how charismatic they were, they became leaders. Hans in the Hitler Youth and Sophie in what they called the BDM, the Bund of German Girls. That was the girls' auxiliary of the Hitler Youth. And they were pretty tough cookies too. They were not cream puffs, I want to tell you, as Hitler Youth leaders. However, when Hans was arrested for this revelation I've offered you, that changed everything. And they had always been also a little bit oriented to an alternative German youth group that had not yet been banned, and that was a little more open to other cultures. And they were thoughtful young people, even though they were seduced by the Nazis, but they started to think for themselves as they got older. And when Hans had this traumatic experience of being arrested and tried by the Gestapo in front of his family, the people in his town, and convicted, that was a turning point. And then slowly they had to evolve from being, disaffected with the Nazis to being, when does the point come that you actually take a step into active resistance? Very few did, very few did. Even if you were disaffected, you might not. Well, Hans and Sophie wound up at the University of Munich in 1940. Well, he was there earlier than her. In 1942, Hans, by that time, had gathered a couple of friends around him, a little cadre of anti-Nazis, and they decided that they were going to do something. And what they did was they started writing and issuing a staccato burst of 6 passionate, outraged leaflets calling out against Hitler the mass murderer. They were the first ones in Germany, and maybe the only ones, to tell Germans as a whole. Here's a quote from them. Don't you know that, well, not don't you know, they said, since the beginning of the war, 300,000 Jews have been murdered in the most bestial manner. This is a crime against humanity, a crime against the dignity of man. But why are we telling you these things? Because you already know them. Everyone wants to be exonerated, but you cannot, because everyone is guilty, guilty, guilty. Wir schweigen nicht. We will not be silent. We are your bad conscience. The White Rose will not leave you in peace. That was like the motto of their leaflets. Anyway, so they issued these leaflets and they did very dangerous things with them. And then the young men in the summer of 1942 were also soldier medics as well as students. And they went east to the Eastern Front, and they saw what was happening in the Eastern Front, and they visited the Warsaw Ghetto. And, soldiers used to take their girlfriends. The big secret of the Warsaw Ghetto was not a big secret. It was even in the German travel guides, like the Frommer guides of that era, the Baedekers. The boys went into the Warsaw Ghetto, and they saw what Germans often did. The soldiers would bring their girlfriends for dates to watch the bodies being shoved down a chute into the ditch. This is like because this represents the renewal of the German people out of the ashes of the Jew. So they were mortified and to their core. And when they returned to Munich in the fall of 1942, they stepped up their resistance. And this time they took stencils 3 feet high with big letters that said Hitler the mass murderer, down with Hitler. And they slept at midnight when no one was watching. They would go to the most important buildings in Munich where people would see them, including the Nazi Party headquarters, the Brown House. And they slashed them through with black or green tar-based paint. So it would be hard to get rid of the lettering. And they used pistol cover even to make sure that if they did get caught, they would shoot. But they were pacifists mostly. Still, you got to protect yourself, right? And then they made dangerous train sorties all over Germany to take stacks of leaflets and then mail them out to professionals. They wanted these to go to educated middle-class German Christians, not ideological tracts that were stiff going to the working class. They wanted this to hit the German people who were Hitler's backbone. And they ultimately distributed 7,000 leaflets in 16 German major cities, including Vienna and Linz in the absorbed Austria. And so what they did was exceedingly dangerous. Then the denouement is in February 1943, the Germans were defeated at Stalingrad. This was in the snows of Stalingrad. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were freezing to death. And the White Rose knew that this was a turning point for the war, and the morale of Germans would be low, sinking. So Hans and Sophie alone, without telling the other members, on February 18th, 1943, took 2,000 leaflets of their 6th leaflet, put it in a suitcase, fit perfectly. And they went into the University of Munich's vast atrium while it was empty because students were in the classrooms. And they took leaflets out and they put them in stacks outside different classroom doors on different levels. Then they went up to the highest gallery in this vast atrium. And just as the bell rang for the change of class, they pushed hundreds of leaflets over the balustrade. They came floating down. This was the only public protest by Germans against Nazism as a whole ever to be staged, ever. They tried to merge with the crowd, but a janitor, Jakob Schmid, said, "Halt! I arrest you in the name of Volk und Führer." And he ran and found them and grabbed them. And they were working day and night, and they were up for 5 days. They were taking amphetamines, anything to keep themselves going. And at this point, they were exhausted and they didn't fight. And they were dragged off to the rector of the university. He was an SS man, of course, not an academic. And then they were taken to the Gestapo prison. And for 4 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, till the 22nd of February, Monday, they were interrogated by the Gestapo ceaselessly. And the noose, they kept on saying, "We didn't do it, it was somebody else, blah, blah, blah." But the noose of evidence got tighter and tighter until they said, "Yes, Sophie said, I did it. And you know what? I would do it again if I had the chance. You have the wrong worldview, not us." What about the Jews? So Hans and Sophie and another friend who was picked up. It's a very exciting story the way all these things happen. They were taken to be tried in a show trial. Hitler himself was so outraged, he sent the hanging judge of the Third Reich down to Munich by plane to try them in a show trial. And he called them, this judge, "Schmarotzer, you parasites, you garbage." And finally said, "What do you have to say for yourselves?" And Sophie said, "What we said and did, other people are thinking. They just don't dare say it out loud." And Hans said, "Where you stand now, where we stand now, you will stand too. Your heads will roll too." Then they were taken back to the prison in the south of Munich, the Gestapo prison. There was supposed to be 90 days for an appeal to be made before an execution was carried out. They were condemned to death. But Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, working with Hitler, said, "We're not going to let these people hang around and be martyrs. Let's execute them right away." So as soon as they got back to prison, they had the last farewell with their mother and father who had rushed down to see them. And they were taken then, given their last rites, and then led each one alone across the prison's cobblestone courtyard to a small room. And there they were beheaded. But Hans, on his way to the guillotine, cried out so that his voice would be heard and reverberate in the courtyard to every prisoner behind every prison cell window, "Es lebe die Freiheit, long live freedom." And then they cut his head off.
So I wasn't going to go here yet, but this is the perfect opportunity, and we're starting to get towards the end. I still want to come back and talk about your work today. But obviously, the lesson for today is obvious, but I guess my question to you is, how do we get the White Rose story into the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah.
How do we get it to the point where it becomes something that can spark that kind of, response?
Well, you know where we need to get it? To the Russian population, because the story of the message of the White Rose is you have to speak truth to power to your own people and your own government and wake them up. So when we see young people and old people protesting in Russia, they're very, very brave. They're like the White Rose, because look, they're giving them 15 years prison sentences if you say boo, if you say that it's not a war. So those people are like the White Rose. They're speaking truth to power. I don't know how we get that message deeper into the wider Russian population, because the more that we put this pressure on Russia to have its economy collapse, and hopefully for these oligarchs to put pressure on Putin because they don't want to see their country destroyed, hopefully more and more people will become like the White Rose there, and they will speak up, and they will realize it's one thing to put down 7,000 people in different parts of Russia. It's another thing to put down 100,000 people protesting. So that would be the way in which the White Rose message would take its full form. And in my multimedia lecture programs that I do these dramatic multimedia lecture programs. And one of them is on Jewish anti-Nazi resistance. Another one is on a postmodern Hasidic tale of the Holocaust, which is really close to me and is very personal. And the other one is called Speaking Truth to Power, the White Rose Anti-Nazi Resistance and Heroes Today in the Fight for Freedom and Human Rights. And in that lecture program, I not only tell the story of the White Rose, but I say, are there any people like the White Rose today, White Rosers, I call them, who are risking their livelihoods, their reputations, maybe even their lives in the name of our shared humanity, speaking truth to power? And then I give examples, and the examples are very inspiring. When I do this for college students, they say to me afterwards, I'm the same age as the White Rose students were. What am I doing? What can I do? And I say to them, don't get yourself executed, because then you can't continue the struggle. But, there are people of all backgrounds around the world who do speak up, and they're inspiring models. I could give you some examples, but I always update it for current events. So right now, the Ukrainians who are fighting back would be heroes for me. Zelensky is a hero, our Ukrainian Jewish hero. President.
Who apparently is a Nazi, according to Putin.
Right. Well, Putin's using this Orwellian double talk. And listen, the White Rose said in their first leaflet, everything that comes out of Hitler's mouth is a lie. Well, everything that comes out of Putin's mouth is a lie. And I'm very politically, I believe that American democracy is under assault today here at home.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, and we spent 4 years dealing with a leader who told lies.
Every word out of his
mouth. Like him or don't like him, at least there's a fact. He told lies.
Well,
maybe we need to create some kind of a hashtag, because apparently today in the world, it's all about the hashtags.
Yeah.
To really inspire those in Russia and those in the Ukraine and those in Europe who need to really stand up like the White Rose.
Yes.
White Rose today, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm inspired that the NATO has come back to existence, as it were, in a solidary way, and that we are doing what we can to help the Ukrainians. And, it's a funny thing. Here I am, a Jewish guy, descended from Jews. And, Jews always had an ambivalent feeling about the Ukraine, right? Because they loved their homelands, but at the same time, they suffered a great deal too. But now a lot of Jewish people who descended from Ukrainians are feeling a lot of solidarity with the Ukrainians in general. And we have Zelensky as being elected. And I think the age of anti-Semitism hopefully is gone from among the progressive younger generations. And I would like to show that solidarity somehow. And
well, whenever you do your Speaking Truth to Power lecture, please let us know. And if we could show it to our people, that would be an honor, because I think you're right. That might be the trigger, the spark that inspires, people all over the world to stand up just like the White Rose students did.
Yeah. And the fact is, they're not unknown. In Germany, they're great heroes, but, they are evoked in a lot of different places in the world now where people need to speak up as they did. And speak truth to power. So it's not that they aren't known, but we need to get their message out much more strongly. And that's why I want to make this film. That's why I'm trying to develop it. Because an American feature film in English, the other films were all in German with art house releases. An American feature film will go global and will tell this story and wake people up. And who knows, it could be shown in some places. Maybe they'll be seeing it in a defeated Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think, the White Rose Resistance is what we need now more than ever. And the fact that this is a project that you have been involved in, besides all the other amazing projects that you've done, working with the Anne Frank Center, and being honored by them, working with the Cinema Art. So, how is your work with the Cinema Art Center connected to the Holocaust work? Where is it?
I first was approached by the Cinema Arts Center on Long Island, which is a not-for-profit, marvelous cultural arts complex, which does not only cinema, but dance and concerts. Anyway, they first approached me because they wanted me to introduce films relating to the Holocaust as an expert. And that was okay, but I love film, and I love being in front of the public. I love interviewing people, and I like making big events and all that stuff. So I became the curator of special programs, which means celebrity programs. So I will bring in EGOTs, Oscar, Grammy, Tony award-winning people, Academy Award winners, Kennedy Center honorees, Nobel laureates. And I bring them in, and I always have something I can show on the screen. It doesn't matter. You can go I had Jesse Ventura, who I like a lot, the body Ventura, and we showed something from one of his TV shows. And then I interview them, and there's almost always, there's a certain social conscious element in their stories, no matter who they are. Like this gay thing. Tab Hunter was one of my biggest guests. People love him. He was so sweet. And he came out as gay and talked about it. So there you have a social element. Lee Grant is Jewish, and she was one of the actresses. She was nominated. She was nominated 3 times for Academy Awards, I think, and she won, I believe, for Shampoo. Anyway, Lee Grant was actually a young actress just starting out when she was blacklisted on the McCarthy blacklist and the House of Un-American Activities. She had 10 or 12 years taken away from her in the bloom of her career. And she came back with amazing energy. So she really recouped. But we told at the Cinema Arts Center the story of her blacklisting. But of course, it's also entertainment. We had Leslie Caron, and I had Christopher Plummer. He was one of the best guests. I mean, I really loved having him. Tony Curtis. I interviewed Bernie Schwartz,
Yep,
and I had his girlfriend, Piper Laurie. Do you know what? She was nominated 3 times for Academy Awards. Do you know what her name is? Her real name was Rosetta Morgenstern.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Yeah. And when their first film was shown in the Bronx, in Tony Curtis's old neighborhood, on the marquee in like the early 50s, it was like The Pirate and the Princess. It said, not Tony Curtis and Piper Laurie in The Pirate and the Princess. It was Bernie Schwartz and Rosetta Morgenstern in The Pirate and the Princess. So they took pride in her. That's a little nice bit of Yiddishkeit after all of that.
And that's why I love Jewish, because there is so much. There are so many stories, and it's endless. And I could talk to you for hours and hours, and I suspect that we're going to have to do another one of these schmoozes soon. Maybe you'll interview me at the Cinema Arts Center. I'll send you the film that we did, which is kind of Holocaust related, that was eligible for an Academy Award and won lots of awards all over the world.
What's the title?
It's called Shechita.
Shechita.
Yeah, which is slaughter.
Oh, slaughter, right.
Slaughter. It's a 30-minute short psychological thriller in Yiddish.
I want to see it.
Yeah, we'll send you a link. It's on our website. So why don't you tell everybody where they can get your book, how they can, book your lectures, and then we'll say our goodbyes, because this has been amazing. I'm so excited to get to know you.
Well, I am excited for us to finally talk face to face after knowing each other in different ways over the years. You can go to my website, which I have to optimize for mobile. But in any event, it's called JudNewborn.com. And let me remind you that it's not Judd with 2 Ds like the Southern singers. It's Judd like Judah with 1 D. So it's www.JUD, like a newborn baby.com. And there you'll have my contact information. You'll see described my 4 different lecture programs. And I want to remind people that they're dramatic, and they're not they're not scholarly, dry programs. They've got, I want people to, I don't want to give the kind of lecture I wouldn't want to sit through. How's that?
Right. Well, but
Yeah.
I see you also do something called To Life, a magical postmodern Hasidic tale of the
Yeah.
Holocaust.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there are so many inspiring stories out there. And
Yes.
obviously, you're very connected to it. And it's really amazing. I couldn't be more happy, Judd, to have finally gotten some time to get to know you. I look forward to our continuing conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure to spend an hour with Judd Newborn and his amazing life story. And I only hope that this is only the beginning of our work together.
Me too.
All right?
Should all be well.
If you want to find out anything more, go to our website, whyilovejewish.org. You can contact us for anything you need from Judd or any of the programs that we have. We have almost 200 programs now on our YouTube channel, available on our website. We have classes and lectures, and we'll be bringing you plenty more. So see you next time at Shmoozing with Avi. Thank you, Judd.
You're welcome. Thank you.